Hello, and thank you for watching my IS presentation. My name is Claire Davidson, and I'm a sociology and English double major at Wooster. And my IS looks at novels that depict climate change and examines the potential of these texts to inspire more to take personal action against climate change, which could in turn generate a widespread climate movement. My central research question is, can novels depicting the disproportionate societal impacts of climate change generate sympathy for environmental situations beyond the reader's immediate community? In other words, could reading about the concrete ways in which environmental degradation causes harm around the world, even to communities a reader might not have personal ties to, encourage more to view climate change as a serious challenge to everyone's social stability? In other words, could more readers develop a climate awareness or an understanding of the profound damage of climate change that manifests personal action? And the hope is that if more and more readers develop this climate awareness, the collective shift required to address a problem the scale of climate change could take hold. So the second part of this question is, if novels could do this, how would they? So I take two approaches to look at novels, and the first is intertextual elements through an eco-critical lens that determine the parts of the text that would potentially transform one's perception of the environment. And then I examine those novels in relation to an empirical study that would examine whether these intertextual elements align with transformed actions in the readers. So my IS is kind of split up into three parts. So the first proposes a theoretical approach to which novels would be best suited to push readers to address climate change. And the second looks at two novels that I believe contain the elements that would best depict climate change. And then the third is a proposed empirical study that would be able to determine whether these texts do have an effect on one's actions. So you might be asking, why novels in particular? So to begin, all stories do contain certain elements that make them potentially well suited to driving social change. They contain characters, which don't have to be human or even living characters. They have points of view and to perceive the events of the story, and they contain morals. And the immersive nature and imaginative nature of novels in particular requires recipients to truly think outside of their limited positionality and experience the events from another's worldview, which could then foster an investment in lives inside of one's own. And additionally, novels can uplift diverse environmental narratives and speak to the ways in which climate change impacts everyone, regardless of their race, class, gender, etc., because climate change does impact everyone in different ways. And as a result, novels can become a powerful tool for calling structural and cultural systems into question, a process that is necessary for shifting behaviors and inspiring the collective action necessary to reconsider the Earth and the way our actions impact the Earth. And by listening to experiences and perspective outside of one's own, the resulting collective action to support those impacted by climate change could hold the power to truly centralize climate change as a social issue. However, while novels hold potential to do this, there are challenges to depicting climate change in fictional texts, which is something that is traced by Amitav Ghosh in his The Great Derangement. Ghosh takes fault with the rapidly growing presence of climate fiction, which is an umbrella genre that has grown with rapid frequency over the last 10 to 20 years. Often shortened to cli-fi, these texts initially presented any imagined environmental reality. But as the genre evolved, cli-fi became in some ways synonymous with speculative futuristic realities, punctuated by dismal disasters and warnings of dire environmental consequences. However, these kinds of futures that dramatically portray the future threats of climate change edge cli-fi closer to false science fictions, and even though climate change is resoundingly a contemporary problem. So Ghosh argues that all genres of modern literature must reflect the pervasiveness of climate change and allow readers to imagine and conceive the natural world as influential and as capable of being damaged. So therefore, in my IS, I argue that a novel should broadly be considered climate fiction if the text centers on anthropogenic environmental change in any way, shape, or form. I'm particularly interested in novels that contain two key elements that I believe strengthen the reader's perception of climate change as a problem they need to take personal actions to combat. So the first of those is a local and a global awareness, which is inspired by Ulrich Beck's theory of cosmopolitanization. And while some argue that the holistic nature of a cosmopolitan worldview overshadows individual circumstances, I believe that cosmopolitanism should instead be looked at as both a loyalty to the broader world and a rootedness to local cultural backgrounds. So in turn, by presenting climate change against this backdrop of local instances of harm, it becomes contextualized and visible. And the second element is an incorporation and elevation of the non-human perspective to depict the ways in which environmental conditions hold the power to shift livelihoods. And by featuring a local and a global awareness and centering environmental voices, a novel could potentially motivate readers to address the climate crisis by broadening an individual and human-centered worldview. And I situate these two elements within the researcher Gregor Anderson's 5 imagination forms for climate fiction. In particular, I think these elements best fit the social collapse, which is where anthropogenic global warming will result in accelerating social disintegration and interhuman violence on a larger scale. But I do keep in mind that these tensions to some extent already exist in the present day. Climate change is already currently causing social injustices. So with that background, I look at 2 novels that exist in recognizable modern-day settings and present overlapping themes that emphasize climate change as a pressing threat. So the first novel is Flight Behavior by Barbara Kingsolver, which parallels the personal growth of the main character, Della Robbia, to the strange appearance of a monarch butterfly swarm on her family's Appalachian farm. And the other novel is Oil on Water by Helon Habila, which follows Rufus, who is a journalist, in his journey across the Niger Delta region to find the captured wife of a British oil executive. Both novels center on the temptations of immediate monetary gratification at the depletion of natural resources, which in turn causes long-term environmental issues that perpetuate cycles of poverty. And I use Rosenthal's eco-poverty critical lens through which to conduct my analysis, which builds off the basis that wealth inequality and climate change are both socially constructed forces of economics and politics and highlight the overlapping themes of environmental degradation and socioeconomic struggle. So as an example, Flight Behavior opens with the main character's family wanting to sell the trees on their land to a logging company in order to receive monetary compensation. However, doing this would pose 2 consequences. Firstly, it would remove protection against heavy rains that have in the past caused catastrophic landslides and decimated their neighbors' homes. And secondly, the unexpected arrival of the monarch butterflies means that if the family cuts down the trees, they could trigger devastating ecological consequences for entire species. And this becomes one of the central tensions throughout the novel, weighing short-term economic relief with the long-term environmental damage and the potential to be pushed even further into poverty in the future. Solutions to address the root of the problem, climate change, require patience and a holistic understanding of the environment, luxuries that take a lot of time, which many resource-poor communities may not have. By showcasing how climate change causes inescapable harm to unsuspecting communities, this eco-poverty narrative strategy navigates the otherwise gradual and broad damage of climate change, in effect demonstrating to readers how climate change is insidious and can cause real-life damage. So with the argument that the texts themselves contain elements that could visualize the climate crisis for readers, I further build a study based upon the model of empirical eco-criticism, which is a relatively new field that asks, how do the assumptions that environmentally engaged narratives contribute to the transformations of attitudes, behaviors, and culture in alignment with empirical data about what these narratives do when they encounter real people? So I use empirical eco-criticism to conduct a study focused on the population of the richest global 10%. According to a September 2020 report from Oxfam and the Stockholm Environment Institute, these individuals contribute most significantly to the climate crisis, responsible for 52% of the world's carbon emissions. Many in the United States are a part of this group, even if they may not consider themselves quote-unquote affluent. This affluent population encompasses those who earned a net annual income of $38,000 to $109,000. And with the median household income around $68,000 in the United States in 2019, most Americans are a part of this population. However, many of these individuals may be unaware of the negative environmental impacts of their actions simply because they don't feel the effects of climate change day to day. So as a result, this is a group that needs to most immediately consider the impacts of their behavior on the planet and on vulnerable communities and change their actions to be more environmentally sustainable. So I propose a mixed methods panel study that would ask the same individuals to read climate fiction over the course of 3 years and take part in discussion groups and formal interviews. The quantitative side of this study encompasses a pre-test and a post-test of the Global Warming 6 America survey that would contextualize the sample into a group of whether their receptivity to climate change at the outset of the study and at the end of the study, and would also further document whether one's attitudes are shifting to the alarm side of the scale, which indicates a person is motivated to take personal action against climate change, or is going the other direction. They are less interested and invested in combating climate change. And the qualitative side of the study encompasses reading these climate fiction novels that I will give to the study participants ahead of time, and discussion groups that would provide background information to the social situations that the novels depict and facilitate the conversation between the readers so that they can further develop connections to the texts. And then in addition to these discussion groups, the participants will take part in formal interviews with the researcher to then describe the actions they may or may not be taking in reaction to climate change because of the novels. And these conversations would be transcribed and coded for latent themes to determine the ways in which one's attitudes are shifting or not shifting in regards to climate change because of reading a novel. So to conclude, while there are many confounding variables that could truly shift one's outlook on climate change, novels must be critically examined as a potential impetus to fight climate change, and future research is necessary to determine the impacts of these texts on individual actions. And because I couldn't do that study in the confines of the independent study timeline, I'd love for more research to be done on this subject. And on a separate note, with a problem as broad in scope as climate change, my own focus on novels can barely scratch the surface of what's necessary to fuel a climate movement. So I'd invite you to reflect on the environmental narratives that have left a lasting impression on you. It can be a novel, a personal anecdote, a short story, fictional or non-fictional, anything that comes to mind. Any story that highlights an environmentally caused injustice, encouraged you to reconsider your personal contributions to climate change, or else helped you to see the Earth in a new light. I'd love for you to share your stories in the comments below so that you may share your personal connections with others. By honoring and sharing the stories that visualize climate change for you, we could slowly build a collective power that combats environmental and social injustices and creates a better world for all. Thank you for listening. My email's listed below if you have any further follow-up questions, and I hope you enjoyed learning about my IS.